You are listening to the Keep the Weight Off podcast with Dr. Angela, episode number 78.
Welcome to the Keep the Weight Off podcast, where we bust all the dieting myths and discover not just how to lose weight, but more importantly, how to keep it off. We go way beyond the food, and we use science and psychology to give you strategies that work. And now your host, Dr. Angela Zechmann.
All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast this week. Today, I'm actually flying solo. Marshall is taking some time off, but I wanted to welcome each one of our podcast listeners to the podcast this week. I have something really important to talk to you about, and that is our primitive brains. So I want us to get a really, really good understanding of what our primitive brains are. You've probably heard of it before as the lizard brain. So what is this? What do our primitive brains do and how they work? Because once you understand what's going on, it makes things a lot easier for you in your weight loss journey. I've been talking a lot about this in the clinic with my patients lately. And I actually always talk about the primitive brain because I just think it really helps to have a good understanding of why it feels like we can have some brilliant ideas at times and then our own brains seem to thwart us at all turns. So this podcast is really going to help you understand why and how it feels like you've got an angel on one shoulder and a devil on another. Okay. So I want you to imagine our ancestors, our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and they're living in caves. And they're trying to find food and water and warmth. And basically, they're just trying to survive until the next day. There were animals that would hunt them. There were warring tribes that would kill them. And life was always a constant jockeying for survival. Well, our brains learned over time that things that brought pleasure were essential for survival. So, for example, when we eat food, we get a little hit of dopamine, and that's pleasurable. Dopamine is the pleasure hormone. So we learn to seek out food. When we drink water, we get a little hit of dopamine, and so we learn to seek out water. When we have sex, we get a bigger hit of dopamine, and we also get a hit of oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And so we learn to seek that out. And this is what perpetuates the species, right? When we find warmth, when we're cold, we get a hit of dopamine. So we learn to seek out warmth. And when we gather in groups, that connection with other people brings a hit of dopamine and again, oxytocin. So we learn to seek that out. So all of these things, food, water, sex, warmth, connection with other people, all of these things are associated with survival and prolonging our lives and perpetuating the species. And so as far as our primitive brains are concerned, these pleasurable things mean life, and they are to be sought out. Okay? The primitive brain also learned over time that pain is bad, that pain can bring death. And so avoiding pain, whether it's physical pain or emotional pain, is a huge motivation of the primitive brain. Our brains learned that if we expend too much energy doing something routine, that we might not have the energy we need to fight a predator or a warring clansman. So our primitive brains learned to conserve energy and to turn routine activities into unconscious habits so that we wouldn't have to think about them and use brain energy for those things that are routine. Our primitive brains learned that if we stayed in the cave and out of the sight of predators, we would be more likely to survive. So our primitive brains will discourage us from sticking our necks out and being seen. So, do you get this? The primary motivations of the primitive brain are to, number one, seek anything that brings pleasure. Number two, avoid anything that brings pain. Number three, conserve energy at all costs. Number 4, stick with people who are safe and fear those that you don't know. And number 5, avoid being seen. Now, this is our primitive brain. So recognize that. That's the animal brain. But our brains did evolve beyond this, correct? So we have a human brain that has evolved past our primitive brain. And this is called our prefrontal cortex. Many people call it our executive brain. Our prefrontal cortex, or that executive brain, is much more evolved and thinks long past immediate survival. It's what makes us human. And this is very different from the animal kingdom, and it's what sets us apart from the animals. Animals don't have meetings. Animals don't plan things in advance. Human beings do. So we use our prefrontal cortex when we plan for the future, when we set goals, when we do creative things like write or create art or design and build buildings or solve problems or read or study, all of that. You're using your prefrontal cortex as you're listening to this podcast right now. Okay, so you may be asking, this is all well and good, Dr. Angela. This is very interesting, but what does this have to do with my weight loss journey? Well, it has everything to do with your weight loss journey, and I mean everything. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you're out running errands on a Saturday afternoon. You had breakfast around 9 o'clock in the morning, and now it's 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and you're starting to get hungry. You want to make a good choice, but you happen to be at Costco, and that pizza that they sell at the snack bar, it's smelling really good, and a soda doesn't cost much more. It's all cheap and delicious and ready to go right now. It's pleasurable and convenient and solves the pain of your hunger. You gobble the pizza and guzzle the soda and go on about finishing your errands. Problem solved. So, think about what just happened there. You have a problem, you're hungry. Your body needs food. Your primitive brain actually thinks that you might die without food, and it's looking for a solution to this. Remember its primary motivations. What's going to be delicious and pleasurable? What's going to be easy? What's going to require the least amount of effort? What will relieve pain? Under these conditions, the pizza and soda is a perfect choice. Pizza is extremely pleasurable. It's actually concentrated pleasure. It's not like eating a salad, which is pleasurable but not concentrated or false pleasure like the pizza. And the soda, with its sugar and its caffeine, hits all the bliss points in your brain. It's a perfect solution. Except your primitive brain is not thinking about all the unintended consequences of this decision. The heartburn you're going to experience later, the blood sugar crash, the lethargy, the weight gain, the increased risk for heart disease, liver disease, cancer, the sleep apnea. Nope, your primitive brain does not have the capacity to envision any of this. It's only concerned about solving the immediate problem of survival right now. Later, you may be asking yourself, why did I do that? It's totally in conflict with the goals I have. And you may feel guilty, and you may have an F-it moment. That's really common. You start to think, this is impossible. This is way too hard. Now, here's something I want to interject here. If you lived on a deserted island, or if you lived in prehistoric times where you had to hunt or fish for your food, or you had to gather plants and berries for food, you could rely on your primitive brain to make good decisions because all you would have access to is whole, nourishing food. But you don't live in prehistoric times. You live in a toxic food environment. Almost everything that's available to eat, like the pizza or hot dogs at Costco, the coffee drinks and scones at Starbucks, the sandwiches at Subway, I can go on and on and on. Almost everything is toxic. Our food is killing us. It takes a concentrated effort to stay healthy when you live in the Western food environment. It takes being a little bit obsessed about making sure that your food doesn't have toxins in it. So remember that you have a prefrontal cortex too. This part of your brain has your long-term goals in mind. This part of your brain understands that in order to lose weight and get healthy again, it's necessary to do some extra work that the primitive brain does not want to do. Things like planning meals ahead, going grocery shopping, taking food with you when you go on errands so you won't end up starving in the middle of Costco. Here is the biggest and best weight loss secret you're ever going to hear. You ready? In order to lose weight and keep it off, what we need to do is to put the prefrontal cortex, the human brain, in charge of the primitive brain. We do this by planning ahead everything we will eat, at least 24 hours in advance. This way, we're not giving our primitive brain any chance of making a food decision. This is why planning is so important. Your primitive brain is very powerful, especially in the moment. So what you're doing is you are instructing the primitive brain by making all of your food decisions ahead of time. This is the only way that you can put the prefrontal cortex in charge of the primitive brain. Any food decision that you make on the same day, you can be pretty well assured that the primitive brain will have some say, even if just for the convenience aspect. For example, I find that when I'm trying to make dinner decisions in the morning, I am more likely to pick easier things that are less nutritious. Whereas if I'm making the decision the day before, or even better, several days before, I'm more likely to include good protein and lots of vegetables. So, the night before, you write down everything you'll eat the next day. Some people say you actually need to do this in the morning after breakfast. Write down everything you're going to eat the following day. In my experience, the night before is enough, but you can experiment with yourself. If you find that the decisions you make the night before are still being driven by your primitive brain and not your prefrontal cortex, try to actually make the decisions a full 24 hours or more ahead of time. Remember why this is so powerful. You're putting your prefrontal cortex in charge of your primitive brain. The 24-hour plan will help you do that. Now, here's another hint. Expect your primitive brain to rebel. Expect it to come up with excuses. This is too much work. This doesn't taste good. This is boring. I'm tired of this. I don't have time for this. Other things are more important. You're going to hear those kinds of excuses all the time. When this happens, you can tell your primitive brain, yeah, I hear you, but we're doing this my way now. I'm in charge, not you. In this way, we learn step by step, bit by bit, to get control over our primitive brains. This is why I always say the weight loss journey done well is a journey of powerful personal evolution. When you can take control over your primitive brain with food, you can do it with other things too, like spending or drinking. You can do it with exercise. You can do it with relationships. You can do it with time management. You can just watch yourself coming more and more into alignment with your goals and dreams and evolving yourself and getting better all the time. And that, my friend, is a very exciting place to be. Okay, so we talked about a lot on this podcast today, so let's review. There are two parts of our brain that can make food decisions: the primitive brain and the prefrontal cortex. The three major motivations of the primitive brain are to seek pleasure, avoid pain, and conserve energy. The prefrontal cortex is your evolved human brain that has your long-term goals in mind. To lose weight and keep it off, it's necessary for the prefrontal cortex to get control over the primitive brain. This has to be done ahead of time, not in the moment. So you want to have your food planned ahead for at least 24 hours. If you do not have your meals planned ahead of time, your primitive brain will be making all of your food decisions, finding whatever is easiest and most pleasurable and most convenient in the moment. And if it helps to avoid pain, even better. So in our Western food environment, you'll be looking for highly processed convenience foods that generate concentrated pleasure. To lose weight and keep it off for good, it's important to plan everything you eat at least 24 hours in advance and carry food with you. This is not just while you're losing weight. This is to protect you from our toxic modern processed food environment. Another thing I will say is that think about our modern food environment. It is so toxic. And so I want you to imagine that you live in Beijing and the air in Beijing is toxic. And you do not go outside without putting a mask on. You just cannot breathe the air. Okay? And this is the way it is for everyone. This isn't just the way it is for people who have lung disease or lung cancer or something. This is the way it is for everyone. If you want to protect yourself from the toxic air in Beijing, you wear a mask when you go outside. So the same thing is true with the Western food environment. The foods that are available are toxic. And so learning how to plan and prepare your meals ahead of time and get your food fixed and plan it is not something you do just while you're in the weight loss process. It's something that you do every day for the rest of your life until we get the mess of our food supply cleaned up. That's how I want you to think about this, okay? All right, so lots to think about, lots to do. It takes a concerted effort to be a healthy person when you live in our Western food environment. So that's all for this week, everyone. I will see you next week. Y'all have a great week. Take care. Bye-bye.
Hey, if you really want to lose weight and keep it off for good, your next step is to sign up for Dr. Angela's free weight loss course, where you're going to learn everything you need to get started on your weight loss journey the right way. Just head over to journeybeyondweightloss.com/free course to sign up. Also, it would be awesome if you could take a few moments and write a review on iTunes. Thanks, and we'll see you in Journey Beyond Weight Loss.